Eni, thanks for joining us today. Well, just wondered if you could start off by telling us about your early life. You know, where were you born and where were you brought up?
Well, I was born in Nigeria, in Lagos, Nigeria. I descend from Nigerian parents. Both my parents are Nigerian, and I came to England when I was very young, so probably about 6 months old. My parents came over to study here, and my mum was studying nursing. My father was actually a semi-professional footballer at some London clubs, and so that's sort of how it all started for me. It started off in London, and we moved very early to Birmingham, and that was sort of the beginning of my life, really, just sort of you know, growing up in the local area and playing football and just sort of enjoying being a kid.
Yeah. So your father, was he instrumental in sort of encouraging you to play football? As you mentioned, he was a player himself. Yeah,
well, I think, to be honest, it's probably natural, sort of gifted talent. I think it's probably in the genes. All my siblings play sport of some sort, and me and my brother Shawnee grew up playing, and I think it's just in our genes, it's in our blood, and something that we're sort of born to do. It was almost like a forced marriage, really. And yeah, my parents just really encouraged me to play, and for me, it was sort of a form of acceptance as a young child. You know, there was a lot of boys in my local area. There wasn't many girls, and so I needed to fit in, and football was really good at doing that. So, yeah, you know, I look back very fondly on my childhood.
Yeah. Did your parents ever talk about some of their early experiences about moving from Nigeria to come to Birmingham? It must have been quite different for them.
Well, I mean, it's never been sort of spoken of negatively. I think, you know, it's always, we look back very fondly at the start, and it's actually something that humbles us. You know, it's, my mum worked very hard when we were younger to, you know, build a career for herself. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, and you know, used to travel all over the country, and yeah, we you know, there was no sort of barriers, or at least there wasn't any sort of barriers that were spoken of at the time. We're a very positive family, and we sort of think about the sky as the limit, really. And I think if you live that will sort of become your story. And you know, for us, it was just, you know, we're very pleased to be in England, and you know, just pursuing whatever sort of happiness and goals that we wanted to as a family.
Well, that's a really nice answer. So it's very positive for you and your family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, I'm here now as an England player, you know, speaking in front of you, and it all began then. You know, it all began with, you know, positive attitude to life, and my parents encouraging me to play well and develop what was, you know, a gift, really. So yeah, it was you know, it was a very positive sort of mindset in the house.
Sadly, there's a lot of negativity and sometimes hostility towards migrants in this country.
Yeah.
Have you got any advice for children who may well be in schools and have come from other countries and are struggling to fit in and get on?
I think my advice would be to be proud of who you are and where you're from. I think the minute you make apologies for who you are, it gives people the impetus, really, to think that it's a negative, to think it's a problem, to think it's something that they can pick on. If you stand up tall and you're proud of who you are, and you say, yes, this is where I'm from, you know, then it's very difficult for people to almost create that as a negative. I think that would be my advice. I was always taught to embrace, you know, my Nigerian background, but also be very proud of, you know, being English, being part of, you know, British culture as well. And as a result of that, really, I suppose I've never had sort of any, I wouldn't say never, but I haven't had any sort of real issues in terms of my identity, because it was always something that was embraced from the start. So I think that would be my advice: just embrace who you are. It sounds easier easier said than done, but I think it is a mentality, and it comes from parents as well. I think it's really important for parents to sort of create that kind of culture in the household.
What would you say to those who maybe are causing the hostility and have got prejudice against people from other countries?
I would say educate yourself. It's as simple as that. I think, you know, people fear difference, and you know, for me, it's a sort of, I suppose it's a survival instinct. You know, a lot of people if they don't know about something, they think it's a negative, and so it's, you know, it's, well, let's beat it down before we even get to know about it. And you know, it's ignorance, really. It's something that is, you know, it's not, it's more reflective of the person that's doing the abusing than it is about the person who's being abused. And so really it's about just people educating themselves and being a bit more open-minded about people who are different.
You played in the States for quite some time. What was that like?
It was amazing experience. I left, you know, at 21, a very sort of ambitious but scared, nervous individual, you know, about, you know, what it was all about, and came back, you know, a better player, better person, with some great friends, and having seen the whole of America. So that experience gave me a lot, and it's made me the person I am today.
Would you recommend travel to other young people?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it opens your mind. I think you know, in the Western world, people can get very sort of caught up in just sort of the comforts of life. And I think if you travel and explore and you see how other people live and you see the little things that make people happy, then it sort of rounds you and it makes you a bit more, I suppose, grounded and humbled by the little things in life. And I think that's really important.
Have you yourself experienced any racism within football or in general society?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I have, not to an extent where, you know, I've been massively scarred by it. As I said, you know, I sort of flip it in a way, and I sort of think that if you walk in confidence in who you are, it's very difficult for people to see it as a negative. And that's the way I've been brought up. But I do think there are sort of more covert ways of racism, which, you know, as quite a perceptive and intelligent person, you see it, you see through it. I think, but that's the case with women in sport. That's the case with, there's so many, you know, different isms, I suppose. But yeah, I think racism is definitely apparent. But I think nowadays, racism sticks out like a sore thumb because the majority of people aren't racist, and I think that's a good place to be in. You know, the minute racism is part of a majority, that's a problem. I think now, you know, something happens that flags up racism and everybody's appalled, and that's the way it should be.
What would your advice be to a young person, maybe at school, who's suffering from racism or discrimination?
I would say be brave enough to tell somebody about it, report it, discuss it with someone who you feel has the influence to change it. There's no point, I suppose it's easier said than done, but there's no point trying to argue with the person who's being racist. You know, they probably have that set belief, and to a certain extent sometimes it's not their fault. It comes from parents, it comes from other backgrounds, it comes from experiences. But if you report it to someone who you feel can influence and change it, or impose a sanction or deter people from doing it again, that's a step in the right direction.
Birmingham has got a very multicultural society. Lots of different religions and cultures live in there very happily. Have you yourself got friends from different cultures, different religions? Yeah, no, I have friends from all over the world. You know, obviously growing up in Birmingham, it was very multicultural. Going to university at Brunel, you know, I have friends from places I never heard of before. You know, I've got a friend from Brunei, I've got a friend from Barbados, I've got friends from Japan, you know, and that's a beautiful thing, because I think it allows you to embrace their cultures and their differences as well. So, you know, I'm really pleased to have had that experience, because it allows you to, I think it allows you to be more rounded and be open-minded about differences. Sadly, there's seems to be a growing number of incidents against people who are Muslim or Jewish. What have you got any thoughts on that at all? Yeah,
it's disappointing. It's scary, and I suppose it's a sort of a sign of the times, really, that we still have to be careful, and we still, as much as we've made a lot of strides, there's still a lot of work to be done.
There's been a number of high-profile incidences of racism in football in recent years, and very recently indeed. Do you think football is doing enough to try and counteract that?
Yeah, I think so. I think You know, I think there's a lot of organisations that are working very hard to, one, create awareness, but two, also speak to the authorities about what they do if in the event, you know, racism crops up. For me, what's important is the sanctions are good enough, the sanctions are strong enough, so individuals, clubs are deterred from, you know, doing it again, or know that if it does happen again, we're going to have to clamp down. I think that's what's important for me, because if people don't see it taken seriously in terms of the sanction, then people will just say, well, it doesn't mean anything if I do it. So I think, you know, there's still some work to be done in that area, but I think there's, you know, we've seen some incidents before where, you know, clubs have been fined, you know, stadiums have been closed to the public because of racism, and that's what we need to see more of. So I think there's been good strides made, but obviously still some work to be done. And
education as well, maybe?
Yeah, education, yeah. I think education is important, but I think education to a certain extent is, you know, it has to be something that comes from the individual. I think, you know, if I said to somebody who is, you know, a racist person, you know, come to an education class and listen to me, you know, they could tick the box and say, oh yeah, you know, I've been to an education class, and I'm not racist anymore. It doesn't. I don't think it works like that. I think it's about a willingness to actually be open-minded, and it's a process. It's a longer process than just going to a class and ticking a box. So I think that, you know, maybe there's different ways that can be done as well in terms of the education of people who have a certain mindset.
What about for young people, for the younger generation? Do you think education can make a difference there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these attitudes start from very young. And like I said before, you know, to a lot of people it's not necessarily their fault. They're a product of their own environment. And so, you know, if we educate people very young, then they know that, oh, well, actually, it doesn't matter that that person's different to me, a different skin colour, different religion. It doesn't matter. And that comes from very early. You know, I have a 6-year-old brother who loves the fact that he has friends that are, you know, different colours and religions, and, you know, and that's what it should be. That's how young it should start. Show racism, the red card.